Hello, lovely people. My name is Rohit, and I welcome you all to the CERTIFY podcast series. In this podcast series, we delve into the intricate landscape of IoT with our experts. We talk about the risks, vulnerabilities, and the solutions which are shaping the IoT space. We have the privilege of hosting an expert researcher founder in the space of IoT. Our guest is Rob, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Ashwin. He has co-founded IoT Council and IoT Day. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rohit. I'm very honored to be here. So looking forward, yes.
Rob, I checked your profile on LinkedIn and I found out that you have done your master's in linguistic. So literature and language and literary theories. So from there, how did you land into the IoT world?
That's indeed that's quite a story. And I studied language and literature and literary theory. And because when I was 18, 19, the last thing I wanted to do is to do something useful. So I thought the best thing to do if I would do anything then was to study language and literature. So it seemed as far removed from the world as possible.
Right.
So I was very happy studying and reading and analyzing poetry and indeed starting to think about things like multi-textual experience and things like that. And then I started, my first job was teaching literature at the University of Amsterdam. Through my teacher, Helga Geyer Ryan, who was my teacher in Tilburg University, and she was also teaching in Amsterdam. She brought me to Amsterdam. And as I was teaching there, I was also getting invited to do a small series at a political center for debate in Amsterdam, which is called the Bali. And this was about media education. So I was looking into media education at some point. I came onto this conference, which was in Sweden, in Jönköping, and it was called Intelligent Information Interfaces, Building Tomorrow Today. And I was so intrigued by that I asked my boss at the Bali, who was then André van Es, who was a quite well-known Dutch politician for the Green Left. Can I go there? I'm not sure if it has anything to do with media education, but it sounds so intriguing.
When was this? In which year?
This was in 1999, 2000.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it turned out to be a day in the context of what was then called the Disappearing Computer Initiative, which was something from Future and Emergent Technologies, and it was called iCube, Intelligent Information Interfaces, and it was started in 1969. So already in 1969, the Commission was putting engineers, ethnographers, artists, designer, real-world use cases. Very, very interesting setup. Not just engineers, but in this conference that I sat and started really wondering every minute what was going on.
Right.
There were engineers, ethnographers, artists, designers, real world, but it was about 300 people, and they all seemed to be extremely keen on this disappearing computer idea. So a man came on stage, and it was later I found out it was Dr. Norbert Streitz from Fraunhofer. Okay. And he was Doctor because he has 2 doctorates. And he came on stage and he said, in 10 years' time, you will have a Bluetooth ring. You will point that ring at a tree as you walk in the woods. A screen will pop up and it will tell you about the tree.
Yeah.
And as he said that, I thought, well, I have to shoot him. I mean, this is the only adequate response to this, because I was coming from literature, having doing connotations and doing the in between as a given, as a real living experience. And
Yeah.
here was someone, and he wanted to put a screen in between me and every object. And he
Mhm.
thought that this was also necessary, because then I would get some data about
Right.
that thing. Well, I didn't have brought my gun that day, so I couldn't shoot him. So I sat there, and I was really upset because no one in the audience thought that this was strange. They all
Right.
thought it was the next move that was going to happen, and it did, because most of the time people who are these visionaries in terms of infrastructure, they get the infrastructure right, but the interface wrong. And of course, what happened in 25 years now is that there's not screens popping up
Mhm.
everywhere, but we
Yeah.
bring that screen ourselves. We have that screen basically always in our hand, which is the mobile phone, the smartphone. So at that time, nobody could foresee the smartphone as the ultimate screen, the interface, the intermediary between us and the world. We would have that all the time. But they thought that screens would pop up.
Right.
But
Right.
as I was sitting there, I realized this is a group of people I have to follow, because this is dangerous.
Mhm.
If this thinking, which seemed to cut out any kind of innate human experience, but would implement that and insert computing power everywhere, um, just to get some data.
Yeah.
Um, I thought that was very dangerous. So basically, for the past 25 years, I've been following this entire movement.
Mhm.
I've become part of it. I've
Right.
become a spokesperson of it. I've become to be seen as a, someone who wants this kind of connectivity. And to a certain extent, I do now, because I followed this entire trajectory.
Right.
And around 2000, this was called ambient intelligence, and it was mainly
Mhm.
driven by Philips.
Okay.
And in the 90s, it was driven by Xerox Spark, and it was called ubiquitous computing.
Mhm.
And in the 70s, it was driven by IBM, and it was called pervasive computing.
Okay.
So it has a history. It didn't start with the invention of the term Internet of Things by Kevin Ashton in 1999, who was then a product manager for Procter and Gamble, coming from RFID,
Right.
and extrapolating RFID into coining the term Internet of Things, which stuck because pervasive computing was too tied to IBM. Ubiquitous computing was too tied to Xerox Spark. Ambient intelligence was the Philips ecosystem. So if you
Mhm.
used ambient intelligence, you would be in the Philips ecosystem.
Right.
And so out of nowhere comes this term Internet of Things in 1999, coined by Kevin Ashton. And that term sticks because it seems to count, sort of like to cover the entire area of what is happening. The reading of the objects, the data emanating from that, and the connectivity that is needed to do all the readings. Um, so then I learned a lot about it. I wrote about it,
Mhm.
and then I wrote a short text, a little book about it in 2007, 2008, and that was read by Gerald Santucci, who was
Yeah.
then head of Internet of Things at the European Commission, and he invited me to join the large reference project, which was then happening, which was called IoTA, which which also had a lot of German partners, including also Siemens, where I met some people from Siemens then. And that led me to set up Council, the Internet of Things.eu, because I thought it would be also necessary to talk about Internet of Things from not just only a technical perspective, but also a cultural perspective and a political perspective, because it was going to be such a big shift.
Right.
And Santucci was also there at this meeting in Brussels in 2009 with his entire team.
Yeah.
And basically through him, I found out about sort of like the existence of these European projects. And as I had done my job well, as people thought in IoTA, which was not so difficult, because what happened with these meetings then was that people would come in and showing their entrance skills of stopping their suitcase just tight to their chair.
Yeah.
Then they would sit. Then they would open their computers. Everybody would start doing their mails. And that was basically the day.
Right.
So there was no design of the day. There was no design of the meeting.
Yeah.
And all I had to do was do a few simple things to get people talking and opening up, because these were people earning immense wages, having immense day pay, just coming into the meeting, doing their mails, basically. That was very common then. Since then, a lot of things have changed.
Okay.
So then I started to be part of European projects, and Council became a mailing list of about 300 experts that's still alive until today. That I set up in 2009, and in 2010, I thought we needed a day for IoT, so I randomly picked a date, which turned out to be April 9, and I started in the first years with Trevor Harwood from Postscapes, doing that, and after year 5, I was sort of like doing this on my own. And every year there's IoT Day, and there's a lot of noise going on that day. So now I'm very happy to be part of these projects for Ashwin. So that's a bit the trajectory of coming from literature to quite logically, in that sense, I would say, to Internet of Things.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure on that conference night you were not able to sleep after hearing from Dr.
No. It was no. I was quite upset for a few years, actually, because coming from literature, I could see that this was a new ontology. Sort of an ontology is a kind of Heideggerian term to speak of modes of being or different notions of being, but we all grow up with certain relationships that we think are normal, and these insert themselves very deeply into our everyday brain and everyday experience.
Right.
So when something comes along that basically challenges that fundamentally, to me it was the same development, the same movement of bringing the book into the world, like in 1452 when you had the first printing machine, which enabled people to cheaply print books and created this entirely new world with schools and universities and and basically reading and writing and the notion of data itself. So that was brought into the world by the printing press. And
True.
what I was seeing then in this conference was basically the same. So I was literally seeing, but pre-seeing, because it wasn't yet there, the smartphone, sort of like the
Right.
mobile phone, sort of like being this same kind of ontological shift that we are witnessing. And so yes, it was so serious that I was very upset for quite some time, actually. That's why I wanted to get some grip on it, to get
Right.
some. I wrote about it, and I set up this council group to be able to bring together a lot of experts who could discuss things. And these are people from very different backgrounds, from hardware to design, and so it's a very diverse group.
Right. Right. I I'm a big fan of your writing. So 2 years back, I read one of your blog on LinkedIn. It was, I think, and now it makes sense why you write the way you write, because there's you talk about deep technologies, IoT and other intricate relationships of IoT technology with other technologies, and still when I read your writings, you use sort of this poetic language which has this literature background, or you would talk about a very important event from the literature, or you would take some expressions from the literature and try to then explain technology with those expressions. And I felt, wow, this is really um, beautiful, how the way you write this poetic language to explain technology.
I'm very happy to hear that. Thanks a lot, because it's really the only way I can do it. And sometimes
Right.
I think, should I write this? Because maybe it doesn't make sense even to me sometimes. But yeah, I take the liberty to do it, and then if you don't like it, you don't have to read it.
That's true.
But I'm very happy that you liked it. Yeah.
And with your IoT Council and IoT Day that you have co-founded, what were the objectives that you set up before founding these two, let's say, organizations, or 2 days to talk about IoT? What was your main objective behind it?
Um, the main objective came after we had uh, we were thinking about the response. So coming from RFID at that moment in time, around 2000 to 2000s, there was Catherine Albrecht from Caspian, and we got in touch
Mm-hmm.
because Catherine managed, with very good staged photos of basically only with 7 or 8 people, to hold the metro trials in Germany.
Okay.
So Metro was having RFID trials in Germany, and she went over and she got 7 or 8 people together. They took very well designed pictures, so it seemed like there was a huge group.
Yeah.
And Metro halted the RFID trials sort of because of that. She wrote me an email saying the time you spend in Brussels and the time spent in Washington is a complete waste.
Mm-hmm.
We really have to be active and to go out there and to protest and to make sure that this RFID is not going to spill over into every object in the world, and become also active RFID, so it starts
Right.
sending out data itself.
Mm-hmm.
But so the first response that I had with friends was to start something called Brico Labs, which was something that was with group of people coming from Indonesia, from Brazil, from Canada, from all over, basically all hackers, because we thought that all this cheap and new electronics would also bring a lot of possibilities for new types of hardware that would actually be more grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
And this Brico Labs line is still active in lots of small projects across the world. And lots of people are. It's gone into also something called techno-animism, where they have all kinds of parties and all kinds of festivities and maker moments of building electronics. But we realized quickly that this would not become a massive movement. So then I also had talks with Santucci at that point, because I said, well, I can set up a big anti-RFID, anti-IoT movement. We can do this in Europe. But something also coming from literature again, basically, having been at this conference, having seen Norbert Streitz from Fraunhofer, having read all these, having understood that this was a wave coming from hardware, software, an emerging cloud, which also emerged around 2000, which made this all possible. Before 2000, there was no cloud. Everything was a demo because it was very cheap. I think in 1992, a gigabyte was about $70,000 or $80,000 of storage.
Crazy.
So it's crazy. So you couldn't do anything. They were all demos. But around 2000, the cloud hits. And it makes all of this possible, all of this data, storing all that data. And from storing the data, you can actually do something with that data. But first you have to store it. You have to be able to do that. And that was only happening around 2000. So seeing all of that, I realized it was unstoppable. This was not something that you could hold or stop or protest against and say, I'm against it. It would make no sense. So then I decided to be a part of it, to set up council and to set up the IoT Day, to be a part of it. And now, for example, this year I was also part of the jury on the industry projects from the Internet of Things World Solution Congress.
Right.
So throughout the years, I've also gained some knowledge and some experience, sort of like about this. And I think I made the right decision, because the whole point of what I was trying to do, it was to also be a very, very, very tiny part of trying to maybe get to know people who would also know where this was going. And in hindsight, that was I think a good decision and a better one than to build a large protest movement, saying that this was all about immense control and privacy invasive and sort of all of these things.
Right.
To me, now and also then, it's another layer across that's on top of the world, and it's humans now designing that layer. It's no longer God doing that. It's us. We are designing that layer. So we have a huge responsibility in building that layer.
Right.
So if we build it well, I think it's really the only mitigation that we have for or against climate change, for example, to have real-time insight into where all the energy sort of like is going. And so these are things that we need to make better decisions. So now I think we're building a layer that could help us build better decisions. And
Right.
that's, I think, why it's there.
Right. Yeah. So in our conversation, I could say that from beginning, this data issues and the privacy issues were the big challenges in the space of IoT. And in the beginning, it was more about how to use IoT, or it was more about how you can implement whatever they were trying to do with IoT technologies and with sensors and electronics. But was cybersecurity also a talking point in the beginning of the IoT space?
Not in the beginning, not in the
Yeah,
beginning, because it was basically um, running on the internet wave, which was then basically um, also not that old, coming from the 50s and 60s, where the protocol itself was built by Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, coming from California, as the TCP/IP, which was at that moment one particular way of looking at it.
yeah,
But this particular way of looking at it won,
yeah,
and that particular way of looking at it just says pass on the packet.
right,
So that's why it was able to move across the world like wildfire, and uh, to be um, to be basically part of any place in the world in under 10-15 years,
right,
because there was nothing like security. It was all about the flow of the data passed on the packet.
right,
And so if you combine that kind of thinking with then the kind of thinking that was there on RFID, which was like the RFID, the one of the alliances at that point said, of course, companies want RFID. It's like giving them an opportunity to rule the world. That's what they literally said. That of having this kind of so in the beginning, in the end of the 90s and in the 2000s, all of this moved like wildfire. Sort of
right.
that, and it was only later that notions of security and cybersecurity
Mm-hmm.
came in. And now it's logical that cybersecurity now is basically, I think yesterday we read something, and it was like it was number one, cybersecurity, number one topic on top of the list at the moment
Right,
in terms of IoT, sort of like all the and because now it's we are going into such a hybrid world where the mix of analog and virtual is actually now building this new layer, and this new layer is now being solidified to a certain extent. So
right, right,
as it's being solidified, it's also under attack, and finally now people are beginning to understand how important the notion of security and cybersecurity is, because if we don't address that and find ways to really harness it,
yeah,
um, we will not be able to build the trust that people will need and feel in their daily transactions,
right,
that are necessary for having them sort of moving into this new layer of transactions. And as long as that's not the case, um, there will be issues. Yeah.
right. Yeah, you rightly say that we are living in this hybrid world, and currently you could see this IoT is connecting with the other technologies also. And you say this quite often that IoT technology is hands and legs of AI technology, because
Yeah.
AI needs a lot of data, and IoT is making it possible to collect this data through the sensor network.
Yeah.
So when you see that IoT technology interacting or started to interact with other technologies, what challenges do you see for IoT technology?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great question. And just to go one step back, sort of why would we want IoT? Why would we like to have IoT? And that's basically because it enables us to go from this layer of data to
Yeah,
information to meaning. We don't need AI actually to go to this meaning kind of layer. At the moment, that's how it's perceived, but it's
yeah,
not necessary. So with IoT, we can do data, information, and meaning. Why is that again necessary and logical? And why would we want this? We want this because we can then do better decision making,
right.
and then we won't do decision making based on, let's say, the ideological worldviews of political parties. At the moment, if we look at Europe, but all across the world, we see kind of the demise of these ideologies and it's also quite logical because we basically have no more need for them, because as
Mhm.
long as we are able to collectively aggregate the data, we can turn this into information, and we can turn this into meaning, and we can turn this into better decision making. Uh, that would be the logical kind of political. That would be the logical politics of this world, and it would also mean that engineers become more political, not in the sense of going into politics, but assuming
Right,
a political role in the sense that what they are doing is actually something that is very important, not just for a project or for the company, but also for the country or for the world at large, especially in terms of climate change.
right,
So, so then if we see that, then the major issue at the moment is the integration of IoT, robotics, and AI, and the notion of autonomy and autonomous objects with kind of purposeful design that is then being built.
right.
So that's where we are. This is a very important question where we have to basically also take a stand at some point,
Yeah,
because this will be our moment, the moment where a lot of semi-autonomous decision making will go autonomous.
right, right,
What will happen if these robots or robotics integrated with IoT and AI become autonomous?
right.
So they would need some kind of context. They would need some kind of, and actually these are the questions that I think should be the questions that our politicians should ask at the moment, instead of doing all these things that that don't seem that relevant. Now, fortunately, I think the Commission has understood this finally, because of course, in terms of, let's say, the world, um, Europe is quite pitiful in the sense that it doesn't own infrastructure, it doesn't have hardware, it doesn't have a mobile phone, basically.
Right,
It doesn't have the cloud. It doesn't have all that is basically necessary to have. Now, China has that because it does deep packet inspection at its borders, creates its
mhm,
own bubble and controls whatever goes on in this bubble. So China is actually sort of run as one big company with all the layers that you have in a company, but then you have them at that scale. And apart from what they are trying to do sometimes, also to control notions of data, this is something we should copy. I mean, this is something
right,
that this is actually something that we should have,
right,
because because European citizens are just paying for all kinds of services, but we don't own these services and we don't own the data that is actually happening in all of these places and locations. So Europe is just yeah, it's just an intermediary that basically has no control over any of these layers.
Right.
So the Commission finally found out about this, and now it comes with about 17 directives and laws and legislations, which, from the Chip Act to the AI Act to the Cyber Resilience and Cybersecurity Act, and a lot more. And it sounds a bit, if you look at all of it, it sounds a bit too much, because you think, I mean, this is how should this be implemented at a company or SME level? At sort of like this is. But it's a big gamble that they're taking, but it's the only gamble that they can take. So they're trying to bring back some kind of control through legislation, and they're counting on the GDPR and the Brussels effect that is going on across the world.
Right.
And we should support it, because it's, at the moment, it's the only way that they seem to be able to and want to move. But we should also support them with innovative ideas about how we think that we should get back this control at a European level.
Right.
And so at the moment, these cybersecurity regulations are all part of trying to get back some European agency. And so Ashwin is supporting that heavily with webinars and with insights, and we have strong people that understand these policy regulations, and so it's a good time to be in cybersecurity.
Amazing, yeah. So there are two takeaways I take from what you have said now. One thing is that European Commission has to invest in the ideas, this innovation, or the companies also has to put in these innovative ideas and get control over what you have mentioned. And the second aspect is this policy aspect. And on both the aspects, we see that a lot of actions are happening coming out of Brussels. You can see a lot of research funding has been given to a lot of projects. Similarly, in CERTIFY project, it's a 3-year project, and there are multiple partners involved in this project. And we are working on a novel cybersecurity framework for IoT devices. And the idea is that we should be able to manage the security of IoT devices throughout the life cycle of the IoT devices. So and what you mentioned about Ashwin as well, that they are involved in multiple research projects. So my question from here is regarding the research. How do you see, or what do you think about the amount of resources and amount of money that European Commission is putting into this? And the second question is about what you touched upon a little bit about CRA and other regulations. When they start to kick in, how the SMEs are going to prepare themselves for these regulations. How do you see the preparedness of European SMEs for these new regulations, especially in IoT space like CRA?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of what the Commission is doing and what Europe is doing, I think setting up these the Horizon Europes is very strong, and it's quite a substantial sum of money. And the way that the research questions themselves are being formed is that they really go to the ground in basically all national countries, and ask experts themselves about how they feel or what they think new research questions should be in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. In fact, our CEO, Mirko Ross, is part of that scheme. So he's one of the people that was consulted in this process of trying to build the research questions from 3 years and 5 years. So you also yourself, you get a good insight into how people are thinking and looking ahead at that to these marks in time. And in terms of the European SME, I think everybody or a lot of people realized that something like this was going to come. The situation just simply could not continue.
Right.
It You basically have whatever you aim to do in the European Union in terms of doing anything, there are regulations. And so having virtually no regulations or having virtually no hints as to how you should operate into something as important as in gathering data. I think everybody was realizing to a certain extent that this was coming.
Yeah.
And so I think the serious people in the SMEs have prepared and have taken their preparations, and also understand that it's not something that is an issue. It's actually a unique selling point. And this idea that cybersecurity is actually a unique selling point. I think this idea is winning,
Yeah.
and people are understanding this. If you don't, sort of then you're setting yourself up for some trouble along the way.
Right. Right. So, Rob, you have been in IoT space and you have seen from the beginning how this IoT space has shaped into different solutions and applications which are out there in the market. How do you see the next 5 years or next 10 years? What different changes are going to come in the IoT field?
Um, I think one thing that will become more vocal and more important is privacy.
Yeah.
So privacy will become a bigger issue. It's sort of as people are beginning to um, and when I wrote this text in 2007, I had the notion of privacies. So we had to move from privacy to privacies. And this was actually something that Gerald Santucci then took on and liked a lot. Because I think we also have to be honest as a growing up 16-year-old or 17-year-old or 18-year-old. If we look at these new generations, who are basically 24/7 online,
Yeah.
who carry their smartphones in their hands basically virtually all the time, who are sort of walking in and out of networks the entire
Right.
time. Sort of having an idea of, let's say, an 18th century notion of 19th century notion of privacy, or Rousseauian privacy, where you could shut the door behind you and then nobody would see you, and sort of like you would be hid from public view.
Right.
This is untenable. So
Mm.
it's also unfair to ask such a notion of privacy when you're basically radiating connectivity. So you will, if you do that, then there will be something at the other end doing something also.
Right.
So I think we need to build different notions of privacy. So we should talk about privacies, and then you will also be able to switch if you walk somewhere through certain profiles, and then if you put your profile full on, you just get whatever is around. And if you put your profile low, you just don't get that. Something
Right.
like that. But
Right.
this is something that is going to happen, I think, in the coming 5 years. that we see these kinds of new notion of privacy.
Right. Yeah, indeed, this is going to be a big issue. I have read your texts regarding disposable identities, and that also goes along those lines, which are privacy preserving temporal identities. Could you tell more about what is the idea behind these disposable identities and how it can be useful in IoT space?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I would was so just thinking. For example, I live in a house. I rent it, and I pay energy.
Yeah,
Basically, all the energy company needs to know is that I can pay.
right,
So if I can send them a token that proves that I can pay, I could go my entire life living somewhere, paying money, paying to an energy company that has no business to know who I am or any other personal information. There's just no need for them. They just need to know that I can pay, and that
right,
can be a small notion in that token that says if I don't pay, then they can get my number, and my number is there, but it's hidden only when I don't pay I can, because then I breach a contract and I can be found. So on that idea of let's say dynamic and service specific and temporal notions, you can build identities, and it's doable from self-sovereign identity. So if you have a self-sovereign identity, from that self-sovereign identity you can create other identities,
right.
and you can create them fully autonomous,
Hmm.
or you can create them with a pseudo anonymity that they can also be, you can always be traced back.
Right,
And I think that pseudo anonymity makes a lot of sense, because we don't want to go really fully anonymous, because that's not how we want to build a world. We cannot build a
right,
world and a social world if everybody starts out and then says we're 100% anonymous. That's not how you're going to build a caring, interesting world of people. So for that you need accountability. So that you need people to feel accountable, to take responsibility. But
right,
you can give them also the opportunity to be as private as possible or as anonymous as possible through these self-sovereign identity and disposable identity ideas. And so there's a foundation now, a foundation called Twins
yeah,
and twins.org. And they have built an SDK on which you can start designing and building your own disposable identities. And one of the, the persons that are in there is one is Lorna Golden, who was there also from the beginning, and Yari Isohani is also there. And the other person is Kai Hermsen, and he is coming from Siemens and the Charter of Trust.
yeah.
And so Kai is a good friend of Mirko also, and so it's a fantastic team. And they've built this.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah,
So, Rob, before we go, one last question. So you have
yeah.
taken a lot of roles in last 30 years in the IoT space. What has been your favorite role in the IoT space? What did you have been a judge at jury as a at IoT Solution World Congress. You have been
Yeah.
co-founder. You host multiple webinars, conferences. You have been teacher at a university. So, what has been your favorite role in this journey on IoT space?
Wow, that's a very good question. I actually have to think about that. But um, Yeah, being part of Gerald Santucci's expert group on Internet of Things in 2010, I think, was really enlightening because there were so many experts coming from all over Europe. And what I also liked very much was the Internet of Things conferences in Wuxi in China.
Okay.
And this is and I went there for a number of times because Wuxi was the city that the Chinese president Wen Yabo actually designated to be the Internet of Things city. He called that in 2010. The Chinese president,
Yeah.
I think in 2010 said Internet of Things plus Earth equals wisdom of the Earth, something like that.
Wow.
But imagine that was the president.
Yeah.
And his cabinet, in his cabinet were 12 politicians. 9 of them were engineers.
Wow.
He himself was a chemical engineer. And so I was always very jealous of that political setup, because imagine to understand this ontological change in 2010, being the president at the level of the country, and having a cabinet with 9 engineers out of 12 top politicians, being able to understand all of these, what needed to be done in terms of building hardware, building software, building infrastructure, building and designing the objects from such a purposeful high level of that I was always amazed. I was always amazed, and unfortunately, with COVID hits, that everything stopped for a while. So, but that was very interesting also, because at one point the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore was there, and his name, I forgot his name, but it's sort of and he was asking, we were sitting in the morning with a group of speakers, and he was asking, where does the next source of value come from?
Okay.
And I never heard any of our politicians say anything like that. And then I realized, okay, that's why Wuxi is Wuxi, and that's why, with all its faults, I'm not going to say that we should have the model entirely, but just. And then the Singaporean minister saying, where does the next source of value come from? Sort of like, and I was thinking, yeah, well, if we could only have some politicians like that, sort of who understand sort of what they need to understand for decision making on this scale. Yeah.
Right. Amazing, Rob. Thanks a lot for your time. It has been really pleasure to talk into also to dive into the history of IoT from the beginning. It's a lot of insightful comments that you have. It was real pleasure to talk with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rohit. It's been my pleasure entirely.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion with Rob from Ashwin. If you want to learn more about IoT security and what Ashwin does, go to their website at ashwin.io. And if you like our content, then please subscribe to CERTIFY channel on YouTube. If you have any suggestions, comments, or suggestions for guests, and if you want to appear on our podcast, please leave them in our comment sections. We check all the comments. See you all next time. Thanks.